railways transformed Britain. From town to town and city to city, the tracks spread. They changed the way we live forever. But there was a darker side to the advent of the railways. This technological revolution offered new opportunities for the oldest of crimes. In this series, we'll be investigating the most notorious murders ever to take place on the British railways. Stories of the men who killed, of the police who hunted them, and of the victims who were left behind. From the files of Scotland Yard and the railway police, this is the history of blood on the tracks of Britain. The 24th of May, 1957. It was Friday night, almost 10:30. At London's Gloucester Road tube station, 32-year-old ticket collector Emmanuel Akinyemi was on duty in the lift. He had just taken 2 passengers down to the Piccadilly line and was about to return to the station above when there was a knock. Emmanuel opened the lift door. It was an elderly woman wearing a white coat and a red hat. She was tall and silver-haired, and she was gasping for help. "Bandit, bandit," the old woman cried. "I've been knifed."
This was bizarre, it was unusual. Her attacker had obviously got some professional skills.
At the time, there was no one on the platform. There were no witnesses to the deed.
It shows just how rare murder on the Underground actually is. The impact it had at the time was huge.
It was a great unsolved mystery of the London Underground.
Emmanuel Akinyemi helped the woman into the lift. There was blood seeping from a wound in her chest. He asked her what had happened, but she could barely speak. She just kept repeating the same word again and again. Bandits, bandits. An emergency staircase spiraled 87 steps from the platform to the street. It was the favorite exit of fare dodgers, so Akinyemi always kept an ear out. That night, as he journeyed up in the lift, Akinyemi heard a rush of feet on the spiral stair.
The rail employee had heard somebody running up the emergency stairs, which sometimes people did to avoid paying their fare. There was no automatic ticket barriers in those days.
Now, to get to the ground took 43 seconds. Anyone can beat the lift. So possibly this was her attacker running away.
When the lift reached the top, however, there was no one to be seen. Akinyemi fetched her some water and left her in the care of a colleague. Then he ran to a phone box and dialed 999.
It's a measure of just how different the times were, that there was no resource to call from within the station. He had to go to a nearby phone box to phone 999 and summon an ambulance.
The ambulance was quick to arrive. St Mary Abbott's Hospital on Marlowe's Road was just half a mile away. As she was loaded on board, the old lady was still clutching her Underground ticket.
She was stabbed 5 times, apparently 4 times in the stomach and once in the back, piercing the heart.
There were no defensive injuries, which suggests that she had no time to ward off her attacker.
I suspect that her murderer came up behind her stabbed her in the back, and when she didn't go down, she turned around, and that's when he continued his attack.
The woman's injuries, however, were too severe. Soon after arriving at the hospital, she died. Her last words had been to a police constable who had accompanied her in the ambulance. "I was on the platform, I was stabbed." But the words had choked in her mouth and she'd said no more. Nobody knew the woman's name or anything else about her. The only clue to her identity was found at the hospital. On her forearm was tattooed a number, 44747.
The number on her arm would have told the investigators that she had been a prisoner of the German concentration camps during the Second World War.
And it meant, of course, that her life had been very far from peaceful.
She had clearly been in a concentration camp in the past, and she was rapidly identified.
Number 44747 was, in fact, Teresa Lubienska. She was a 73-year-old Polish countess. She lived on Cornwall Gardens, just a short walk from Gloucester Road tube station. The Countess was well known in London's Polish community. She was widely admired, not only for her heroic exploits during the war, but also for her community work in the years since.
The Polish community was deeply saddened. She was a major figure.
So Countess was admired and had a good reputation amongst the Polish people in London because of her unstinting hard work on their behalf.
There was a tremendous outpouring of grief. She was loved, she was regarded as a treasure, she was highly respected, and people just could not understand the reason for this brutal attack and her death.
Nobody had seen the attack on the Countess. There was no sign of the murder weapon. And even exactly where Teresa had been assaulted was a mystery. Was it on the platform or on the train? The only blood evidence was by the lift, where Teresa had found ticket collector Emmanuel Akanyemi.
Those were long before the days of CCTV or any kind of recording devices on platforms, on trains and things like that.
No direct witnesses, no forensic evidence, no CCTV images. Even in modern times, this murder might have got unresolved.
The motive for the murder is very unclear. Was it a robbery that went wrong, or was the Countess Lubienska a victim of something that had happened in her past?
As police began to investigate, they quickly realized that Teresa Lubienska was a woman with a remarkable story. A woman whose death was as mysterious as her life had been extraordinary. Countess Teresa Lubienska was 73 years old when she died. Hers had been a life of privilege, tragedy, and great bravery. Teresa was born on the 18th of April, 1884. Her family was an old aristocratic one, and she married into another. She became the Countess Lubienska.
She lived on the family estate in some wealth and privilege.
The family she married into was one of the leading noble families in Poland. They had vast estates, they had distinguished individuals in their historic past. They had a very proud Polish heritage.
Her husband was a diplomat, and they had two children, a daughter, Isabella, and a son, Stanisław.
But the violent upheavals of the 20th century would soon engulf Teresa's life. In 1918, the Bolsheviks seized the family estate. Teresa's husband was stabbed to death.
The Lubienski estates were in the eastern part of what was beforehand of the Polish Commonwealth, so in lands which were part of the Russian partition. And when the Bolshevik revolution broke out, these territories were engulfed by the revolution.
Teresa was widowed with two children, her estates largely lost, but they were very far from penniless.
She moved to Warsaw and lived in a flat, obviously in far less wealthy conditions than she had been when she was first married.
The end of the First World War had redrawn the political map of Europe. Poland became a free, sovereign nation for the first time in more than 120 years.
It was a period of great activity for the whole nation, rebuilding its independent state.
There was huge rejoicing, and quite a lot of Polish families actually travelled back to help support and develop this new, old, independent country. And Teresa Lubienska was very much part of that.
She was a very talented person who could not sit at home twiddling her thumbs or just being happy doing the knitting. She herself was a very creative person. She published several poems. She was an interior designer, and she was the co-owner of a small film production company.
In time, her son joined the military. He became an officer in the Polish cavalry. He'd be on the front line when the independence of his nation was threatened once again. In September 1939, Poland was invaded by Nazi Germany, and within days, the Wehrmacht had Warsaw surrounded.
It was for a Polish army that was not well armed, fairly small, a desperate situation.
The Polish forces didn't really have any chance of mounting any significant resistance, although they fought very bravely.
In fact, Teresa Lubienska herself took part in the defense of Warsaw, being very active, especially in soup kitchens and providing food for the command of the defense of Warsaw.
Her son, Stanisław, is in the premier cavalry regiment of the Polish army, the Uhlans, 14th Regiment. And it meant that apart from anything else, he was expecting to be at the forefront.
The 32-year-old Captain Lubienski was stationed in a village just north of the capital. He tried to break through the German lines and make contact with his command post. A machine gun cut him down. He was carried to a nearby farm, and there he wrote a few last words to his mother before he died. The Nazi invasion of Poland from the west was followed by a Soviet invasion from the east. Proudly independent Poland was carved out between them. The Germans occupied Warsaw, but Teresa remained defiant. She made sure her son's body was taken from its battlefield grave and given a proper burial. Then she joined the resistance.
Nazi Germany's policy towards the Poles was that it was intent on destroying both the native Polish state and the Polish nation.
But the Polish resistance was pretty successful in disrupting German communications and generally making themselves difficult.
The kernels of it began just before the capitulation of Warsaw, and it developed into what is popularly known as the Armia Krajowa, or the Home Army. Arguably, it became the largest resistance organization in occupied Europe, as well as probably one of the most effective.
Stefan Witkowski was an eccentric and charismatic engineer. He founded the Musketeers, a network of resistance cells scattered across Poland. At the heart of the Warsaw cell was Teresa Lubienska. The 55-year-old widow lived on Saviour Square in the city centre. Her apartment there became known as Salvation.
This is a woman of guts, of passionate commitment to Poland and to the Polish people. You can't be as deeply involved as she was with all the various elements of the Polish resistance without putting yourself in enormous danger.
If she was arrested, then she faced torture, interrogation, imprisonment, and probably death.
The work of the underground resistance in Poland was very, very dangerous. There was always the risk of betrayal by informers or collaborators.
The Gestapo were hunting down any opposition to Nazi rule. Spies and informants were everywhere. And there were divisions in the resistance itself. In 1942, Witkowski, leader of the Musketeers, was accused of collaboration with the Germans. He was tried and executed by his fellow Poles. The network he had led collapsed. Teresa was betrayed to the Nazis.
Teresa Lubienska was betrayed by the caretaker of the block in which she had her flat, and as a result, she was arrested by the Gestapo.
Her connections, her reputation, it would have been good for the German occupiers if they could possibly have used her on their side, but of course there was absolutely no hope of that.
She was taken to Pawiak prison for interrogation. It was an old jail in the heart of Warsaw. When the Nazis occupied Poland, it became a Gestapo prison. Over the course of the war, more than 100,000 prisoners were detained there. Almost half never came out. But not the Countess. After 6 months in Pawiak, she was transferred out of the prison. She was sent to Auschwitz. Teresa arrived at the death camp on the 13th of May, 1943. There, she was not Teresa. She was not the Countess. She was number 44747.
Prisoners entering the prison for the first time would see above their heads a sign saying, "Work makes you free." It was a place of death.
She did much to try and alleviate and help her fellow prisoners by talking to them, even giving some of her rations of food, especially to the children.
She used her reputation and her sheer determined character, not only to keep herself alive, but also to help and give comfort to the other prisoners.
The war was not going well for Germany. As the Red Army advanced through Eastern Europe, the Nazis began to evacuate and liquidate the camp at Auschwitz. In August 1944, Teresa was transferred 400 miles west to Ravensbrück. There, at last, she would find her salvation. The Swedish Red Cross were negotiating the release of prisoners from the concentration camps. Talks with senior Nazis were led by Swedish Count Volker Bernadotte. On the 21st of April 1945, Heinrich Himmler agreed to free all women held at Ravensbrück. Teresa and thousands of others boarded white-painted buses. They were to be transported north through Denmark to Sweden.
It seems that Teresa was one of the last contingent to be evacuated from Ravensbrück, very possibly because she herself wanted others to go first. It would be very, very much within her character that that was the case.
In Lund, safe at last, Teresa wrote poems of thanks to her saviours. "Swedes," she wrote, "dearest to our hearts, God bless you for your hospitality." But she would not stay in Lund. Like thousands of other Poles after the war, she chose to make her new home elsewhere. She moved to London. After moving to London, the Countess lived in a single furnished room and survived on national assistance. But she did not let that poverty stop her.
It would have been very easy, I suspect, to have sunk into depression after a pretty unpleasant and challenging time in Auschwitz and Ravensbrück. But not Teresa. She takes a lead in the exiled Polish community.
The majority of the Polish soldiers remained in exile and found permanent homes in various countries of the world, but primarily in Great Britain, which was the centre of much of the political, cultural, economical, academic and educational activities of the Polish community.
They could not go back to Poland, which was now completely under Russian domination. It was Stalin's Russia, and the government in Poland was now a Russian puppet government.
Teresa was not interested in going back to Poland after the war because the Soviet takeover of Poland represented to her the death of the Polish culture, Polish nationalism, the Polish heritage that she treasured.
The 73-year-old became one of the best known and most respected Poles in all of London. Her life was committee meetings one day and association dinners the next.
She founded the Polish Association of Former Political Prisoners, and she spent her time organising, lobbying and trying to get compensation for her fellow Polish people.
She was particularly concerned about the lack of recognition of the fate of Polish concentration camp prisoners here in Britain. Various prisoners of different nationalities received compensation or were in the process of receiving compensation, but the Poles who were living outside of Poland received nothing. And it was her life's mission to rectify this.
This was a woman with a considerable amount of energy, tenacity, and determination. She had guts. She didn't give up.
The 24th of May, 1957. It was the name day of Maria Tchaikovsky, and she was throwing a party. 30 friends joined her to celebrate. Among them was Countess Teresa Lubienska. The name day party was in Ealing in West London. After eating and drinking and toasting the health of all present, the Countess decided it was time to head home. She left the party at around 9:30. She was joined by her friend, 50-year-old priest Kazimierz Krzyżanowski. Together they walked to Ealing Common Tube Station. There, they caught an eastbound Piccadilly line train.
Father Krzyżanowski was an assistant in the Polish parish in Brompton Oratory, but also a personal friend and a vice chairman of the association of which Teresa Lubienska was chairwoman.
Because it was after 10 at night, there were relatively few people on the train. There was nothing out of the ordinary, there was nothing particularly alarming.
At Earl's Court, Father Krzyżanowski got off. He wished his friend good night, and the doors closed, and the train carried the Countess off into the tunnel. The next stop was Gloucester Road. Father Krzyżanowski returned home. He could not know it as he went to bed that night, but police had already begun investigating his friend's murder. The investigation was led by F Division's Detective Superintendent Ronald Vivian. After 27 years on the force, he was nearing retirement. Vivian was looking forward to it. He never wanted to be a policeman in the first place. But if this was to be one of his final cases, it would not be an easy one.
It was such a difficult case because there was no evidence.
The postmortem showed that the knife had been used, had a blade of no more than 2 inches in length. An unusually short weapon for such a murderous attack.
So the police knew that she had been stabbed. They knew that it had taken place on the platform. Her dying words were, "Yes, I was on the platform, I've been stabbed." It was the bandits.
She was, by all accounts, however, alone on the platform, and there were no witnesses when the station clerk, Emmanuel Akinyemi, went down and found her.
Nobody actually saw the Countess attacked on the station platform. In fact, nobody knew precisely where the attack had actually taken place on the platform. There were no bloodstains to mark the location. There were bloodstains by the lift along the Countess's clothing, but the exact location of the attack could not be pinpointed.
Police photographed the scene and dusted for fingerprints. They scoured the platform, the lifts, the emergency stairs. Then they turned to the mammoth task of searching the tunnels. 2 miles of track between South Kensington, Gloucester Road and Earl's Court stations had to be checked. Floodlights were brought in, and police used magnets and giant vacuum cleaners to search every inch. But they found nothing. Staff and passengers at Gloucester Road were interviewed. Police quizzed the drivers of trains and buses that were in the area. They searched drains and sifted through rubbish in the hunt for a clue, any clue. But again, they found nothing.
It was a joint investigation with the Metropolitan Police Murder Squad, who were in overall control. The bulk of the work seems to have fallen on the London Transport Police.
This was an unexplained death on the Underground, and they felt it necessary to conduct this huge, extensive search in order to reassure the travelling public, to make sure that people carried on using the tube.
The police really were desperately going through the methodical police work to try and find clues and leads.
But the police were, in the absence of any concrete information coming from Teresa herself or from her friends, left with virtually nothing to work on.
The police needed more information. A massive publicity campaign was launched, Scotland Yard's biggest ever. Posters were displayed across London. Appeals were broadcast on the television news. Over the summer of 1957, police received hundreds of leads. They interviewed thousands and journeyed across Britain and Europe in search of clues. But they made no progress.
It was a very big inquiry, but the police just didn't have enough to work on.
They had the dying words of the Countess. They had the evidence of the underground employee operating the lift who saw her. They had his evidence that somebody had run up the emergency stairs at about the same time. And then, despite all the searches and the interviews, they didn't find anybody else who had actually given them that crucial lead that murder inquiries so often need.
Between them, the British Transport Police and the Metropolitan Police conducted over 18,000 interviews, trying to track down somebody who might have seen something suspicious, somebody who could be persuaded to acknowledge some kind of involvement. And time after time after time, they drew a blank.
The murder of Teresa shocked London's Polish community. The murder made no sense to them. They couldn't believe this woman had any enemies. Who would have wanted to kill her? Detectives in the Kensington headquarters puzzled over the same question. Was the murder of Teresa Lubienska the work of a maniac, a robbery gone wrong, or was it an assassination? Police investigating the murder of Teresa Lubienska were running out of ideas. The 73-year-old Polish countess had been stabbed on a platform at Gloucester Road tube station. She had died of her injuries in hospital. But the mystery of who had attacked her and why remained.
They had a number of apparently puzzling, contradictory features. First thought, this was an attempted robbery, but she still had her handbag. More than that, she had been out for the evening. She was wearing a valuable brooch.
It was unlikely to be a robbery as nothing was stolen from the Countess. Her handbag was with her and it hadn't been either opened or rifled through.
There was no sign of any panicked attempt to grab, so the police dismiss robbery.
She seems to have been taken completely unaware by her attacker, who got close enough to stab her 3 times in the chest with a 2-inch bladed knife, 2 of the blows going into the heart and killing her. Murder seems to have been her attacker's intention. It wasn't robbery.
The tiny bedsit where Teresa had lived was searched. Scores of papers were carried away. The Countess could speak 4 languages, and there were letters and documents in English, German, French, and Polish. She had contacts with former concentration camp inmates around the world. Might a clue be somewhere there? Could she have known a secret that someone would kill to protect?
There was grounds, certainly, for suspecting that this could have been an ordered political hit. Teresa is often put down as a social activist, and she was, but there was a very strong political dimension to that social activism.
She had apparently told friends that she had felt under threat in the previous week or 2 beforehand. and had in fact gone to the police station to report that she'd had some threatening phone calls and letters.
After all the experiences she had, she was going to be too shrewd not to recognise she was being followed.
But it seemed rather illogical that a political assassin would have left so much to chance on an underground station platform when anybody could have come along, or another train could have arrived, or a member of the station staff could have been there.
So far as the police were concerned, it seemed unprofessional. Why not a gun? Why not poison? And if a knife, why not a knife actually designed for the purpose of killing?
Police had ruled out a robbery, and they could find no political motive for her murder. It was not an assassination. Detectives kept returning to one theory, though. Teresa had been a formidable woman. Despite her advancing years, she thought nothing of confronting poor behaviour when she saw it, of giving a piece of her mind to young hooligans, or, as she always called them, bandits.
When she got off, apparently there was a group of teddy boys on the platform waiting for a train.
Some youths were being a bit disorderly and rowdy. Some suggestion that maybe the Countess sort of ticked them off, possibly, for misbehaving.
Teresa Lubienska was a very forthright person, so if someone would have been pushing onto the train without letting someone off, she wouldn't have remained silent, but would have said something.
Despite the Countess's use of the phrase bandit, I don't think this murder was actually committed by a gang of hooligans. The only person heard by the station employee was of a single person running up the emergency stairs. Only one person seems to have been involved in the attack.
This is 57. This is when we're building up to a panic over gang warfares. So it's a very obvious suggestion. But if it had been a gang of youths, we'd have heard about it by now. One thing about gangs is that somebody talks.
If there had been a gang on the platform that night, they were never identified or traced. The police investigation into the murder reached a dead end.
They come to the conclusion that it has to be simply a random, impulsive attack. I simply cannot find that credible. She was a target, but I think it was a more personal than a political attack on her.
My own feeling was that it was related to something that had happened back in wartime Poland during her work in the resistance. Possibly her attacker was a collaborator who had suddenly surfaced in London, recognising the Countess or knowing of the Countess, feared that she might betray him or her.
The knife used suggests that it was more likely to be opportunistic. Oh my goodness, here is the woman I'm following. There's nobody else on the platform. The train has gone. Let me take this opportunity to get rid of her, rather than being a planned attack.
There's a natural feeling that there must be some evidence somewhere amongst that background that should have led to the case being solved. We will never know for sure, and it's one of these murder mysteries that we'll always have to wonder about.
The grief of Teresa's friends and the wider Polish community, however, went on. The funeral of the Countess Lubienska took place on the 1st of June 1957. More than 1,000 mourners packed into the Brompton Oratory in Knightsbridge.
Brompton Oratory was the centre of the central London Polish parish. So it was a place where Poles always gathered on Sundays and on special days.
There were representatives not just from the Polish community in this country, but also members of the Polish resistance, representatives from the various groups turn up to pay respect, pay their tributes to her. So it was something that was a great grief to the Polish community.
Leading the funeral procession was General Anders, wartime commander of Polish forces. After him came comrades from the resistance, those who had suffered with the Countess in Auschwitz and Ravensbrück, and those who'd known her kindness and determination in London. Lying on Teresa's elm coffin, 2 medals gleamed from a purple cushion, orders of merit from the Polish nation, tokens of their gratitude.
The Countess was an extraordinary woman. There was a tremendous amount of sympathy and love displayed at her funeral.
The Polish community were devastated by the fact that this 73-year-old woman should have experienced so much in her life and so much tragedy and violence and survived, and then been stabbed and murdered at a supposedly peaceful tube station in London.
It's a word that's often used lightly, but I think that Teresa Lubienska most truly qualifies as a heroine, because despite everything that happened to her, she carried on.
Teresa Lubienska, when she was in a concentration camp, was known as the White Angel, helping wherever and whoever she could. I think, looking back at her life, she comes across as being a feisty, determined angel of mercy, a remarkable person.
Teresa Lubienska was a devout and brave daughter of Poland. To this day, her murder remains unsolved. But her heroism in peace and in war has not been forgotten.